ready to journey back in time. Today we're focusing on a figure whose name echoes through the halls of history, Hammurabi.
Hammurabi. The name itself conjures up images of ancient laws and a king who ruled a vast empire.
Right. And this king, the sixth Amorite king of the Old Babylonian Empire, to be exact, reigned from about 1792 to 1750 BC. A time so far removed from our own, it's hard to even fathom.
It is, but his legacy, oh, it's definitely closer than you might think.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to explore the life, the times, and the impact of this Babylonian king.
Sounds like a plan.
So when we think of Hammurabi, we often picture him as this powerful ruler.
A ruler of a vast empire.
Right, a vast empire. But when he first came to power, things were quite different.
Oh, yeah, completely different. You see, at the start of his reign, he was just the king of a, well, relatively small kingdom, just one of many players in this ancient Game of Thrones playing out across Mesopotamia.
I see. So not the all-powerful emperor we often imagine, more like a local leader in a region teeming with powerful city-states, each vying for supremacy.
Precisely. In fact, his father, Sin-Muballit, passed on the throne due to some health issues. So, Hammurabi inherited a kingdom that, while not the biggest, had a solid foundation.
Okay? And surrounding this kingdom, this fledgling kingdom, were some major power players. We're talking Elam to the east, a very powerful kingdom, Assyria to the north, also a force to be reckoned with, and then you have city-states like Larsa and Eshnunna, all competing for control in this incredibly fertile and strategically important region.
A real hotbed of activity and ambition.
Absolutely. So, where do we even begin with Hammurabi's story?
Well, I think we should trace his journey from consolidating his initial territory through those sweeping conquests. And then, of course, we have to delve into his most famous contribution, the Code of Laws.
The Code of Laws. That's what he's really known for, isn't it?
It is, but there's so much more to Hammurabi than just that code.
Agreed. So let's start at the beginning, those early years of his reign. What do we know about them?
From what we can gather, it seems the initial phase of Hammurabi's rule was pretty peaceful. He seemed to focus a lot of his energy on internal improvements, strengthening his base, so to speak.
Oh, that makes sense. Kind of like a leader today focusing on infrastructure and development.
Exactly. And we have records indicating he invested heavily in public works, fortifying the city walls of Babylon, which would have been crucial for defense in such a volatile region.
Of course. And he probably expanded temples, too.
Oh, absolutely. Temples were central to religious and civic life back then. Investing in them would have been seen as a sign of piety and also a way to appease the gods.
So Hammurabi's laying the groundwork, building up his kingdom. Things seem to be going pretty smoothly, but then something happens, right?
Then the geopolitical chessboard gets shaken up. Enter Elam, that powerful kingdom to the east. And they weren't messing around. They launched a full-blown invasion.
Invasion. So not just border skirmishes or minor conflicts.
No, a full-scale attack. And their target, Eshnunna, they basically dismantled it. That sent a pretty clear message to the rest of the region. Elam was a force to be reckoned with, and they were hungry for power.
I imagine that sent shockwaves through the region. Everyone must have been on edge.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
This Elamite aggression, it was a turning point. And Hammurabi, he recognized the danger.
So what did he do?
He knew he couldn't face Elam alone. So he did what any smart ruler would do. He formed an alliance. And not with just anyone, but with Larsa, a powerful kingdom in the south.
So two of the major players teaming up to face this common threat.
Exactly. And together, they were able to confront the Elamite forces and, crucially, they pushed them back. They were successful.
Wow, they must have been a major victory, pushing back an invasion like that.
Oh, absolutely. A turning point in the region's power dynamics.
But this alliance, this Larsa-Babylon alliance, it didn't last forever, right?
No, it didn't. It seems that Hammurabi wasn't completely satisfied with Larsa's contribution to the war effort. Maybe he felt they didn't pull their weight.
Or maybe he saw an opportunity.
That's very possible. Larsa was weakened after the war, and Hammurabi, ever the strategist, might have seen a chance to expand his own influence.
So the old adage, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, doesn't always hold true in the world of ancient politics.
Not always, no. And within a few years, Hammurabi turned his attention south.
And what happened?
By approximately 1763 BC, Hammurabi conquered Larsa, bringing the entire southern Mesopotamian plain under his control. It was a huge victory for him, consolidating his power in the south.
So now he's in control of the south. What about the north? What was happening there while all this was going on?
Well, while Babylonian forces were busy in the south, things started to get a little restless up north. Remember, Hammurabi had been away focusing on his southern campaigns.
So there was a power vacuum.
Exactly. And as often happens in such situations, unrest began to brew in the northern territories.
I see. So Hammurabi, having secured the south, now had to shift his focus back north.
Precisely. He needed to reassert his authority and bring those northern territories back under his control. And that's exactly what he did.
How so?
Well, his first move was a significant one. He marched north and, well, he destroyed Eshnunna, the very same kingdom that Elam had ravaged earlier.
Wow, that's a bold move. Almost a statement, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It was a way of showing those northern territories who was in charge. It was a clear message: don't even think about challenging my authority.
And did that work? Did it quell the unrest?
It seems so. Following the subjugation of Eshnunna, Hammurabi continued his northward expansion, taking control of other northern states. And one conquest in particular stands out: Murray.
Mari. That was a significant city-state, wasn't it? Known for its palace archives, right?
Exactly. And what's interesting about Murray is that there's some debate about whether its conquest was a full-blown military conflict or more of a surrender.
Oh, really? A surrender? Why would they do that?
Well, it's possible that after witnessing Hammurabi's ruthlessness in dealing with Eshnunna, the rulers of Mari decided it was better to negotiate a surrender than face the wrath of the Babylonian army.
Smart move, probably.
Quite possibly. It would have been a far less costly option, both in terms of lives and resources.
So Hammurabi's northern campaign was a success. He consolidated his power, put down any rebellions, and expanded his territory. But his ambitions didn't end there, did they?
No, they didn't. He had his sights set on an even bigger prize: Assyria.
Assyria, that was a formidable opponent, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Assyria was a powerful kingdom with its own imperial ambitions, and the clash between Hammurabi and the Assyrian king Ishme-Dagon I was a clash of titans, really.
Yep. This wasn't just another quick conquest then.
Not at all. This was a protracted war, a lengthy and fierce struggle for dominance over Mesopotamia. Both sides, Jew and allies, smaller states, forced to choose sides in this epic power struggle.
A real Game of Thrones scenario.
Exactly. And it was a war that would ultimately test Hammurabi's skill as a military leader and a strategist.
So who won?
In the end, Hammurabi's forces prevailed. They were able to defeat Ishme-Dagon and Io and drive him from power.
A decisive victory then.
It was. And to further cement his victory, Hammurabi forced Ishme-Dagon I's successor, Mut-Ashkur, to pay tribute to Babylon. It was a clear sign that Assyria, once a rival, was now a subordinate power.
Amazing. So in just a few short years, Hammurabi had gone from being the king of a relatively small kingdom to the ruler of almost all of Mesopotamia. That's incredible.
It is. He managed to unite a vast and diverse region under his rule. It's a testament to his military prowess, his political acumen, and perhaps a bit of luck.
And to think, Assyria, a kingdom that would later become a major empire in its own right, was forced to pay tribute to Hammurabi. It really shows the extent of his power and influence.
And we have evidence of just how far his influence reached. A stele bearing Hammurabi's inscription was discovered as far north as Diyarbakir in modern-day Turkey.
Wow, that's a long way from Babylon. What did this inscription say?
Well, in it, Hammurabi claimed the title King of the Amorites, a title that reflects the vastness of his dominion and his position as the leader of the Amorite people.
It's one thing to read about conquests and battles in history books, but to see physical evidence like that, an inscription so far from his capital, really brings it to life.
It does. It allows us to connect with the past in a tangible way.
Absolutely. But conquering an empire is one thing. Ruling it is quite another.
Oh, absolutely. Maintaining order, administering justice, dealing with the everyday challenges of governing such a vast and diverse territory, that's a whole other story.
And how do we know about those challenges?
Thankfully, we have some fascinating insights. Aside from grand inscriptions and accounts of battles, archaeologists have uncovered a treasure trove of more mundane but equally revealing documents. Things like contract tablets and personal letters.
Contract tablets, like legal documents.
Exactly, thousands of them. These tablets record everyday transactions, agreements, disputes, all sorts of things. They give us a glimpse into the daily lives of the people who lived in Hammurabi's empire.
Wow, that's amazing. And personal letters, you mean letters written by Hammurabi himself?
Yes. We have a collection of 55 letters written by Hammurabi to various officials and subjects throughout his empire.
What do those letters tell us?
They're incredibly revealing. You see, these letters aren't about grand pronouncements or declarations of war. They're about the practical, everyday challenges of running an empire.
Like what?
Well, we see him dealing with things like the aftermath of floods, which were a common occurrence in Mesopotamia. There are letters about adjusting the calendar, which was crucial for agriculture and religious festivals. And there are even letters about managing the vast herds of livestock that were essential to the Babylonian economy.
It's fascinating to see that even a powerful king like Hammurabi had to deal with these sorts of everyday problems.
It shows that even in ancient times, governing was about more than just military might. It was about administration, logistics, and dealing with the often mundane realities of keeping a complex society running smoothly.
Absolutely. So we've talked about Hammurabi the conqueror, Hammurabi the administrator. But now let's get to what he's perhaps best known for. Hammurabi the lawgiver.
The Code of Hammurabi, a set of laws that have echoed through the centuries, influencing legal systems and inspiring awe and debate.
It's fascinating how this collection of 282 laws, inscribed on a stone stele over 3,800 years ago, still captures our imagination today.
It is. And it's important to note that while Hammurabi's code wasn't the first set of laws in the ancient Near East, it was certainly one of the most influential.
What were some of the key differences between Hammurabi's code and earlier law codes?
Well, earlier codes, like those from Sumer, often focused on compensating the victim of a crime. So if you stole something, you had to pay back the victim.
Makes sense. But Hammurabi's code took a different approach.
It did. It placed a greater emphasis on punishing the perpetrator. It was about retribution, about making the punishment fit the crime.
The famous eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth principle.
Exactly. That principle, known as lex talionis, is a key element of Hammurabi's code. It's a concept of reciprocal justice, where the punishment should mirror the offense.
And this code, these 282 laws, they were inscribed on a stone stele. What exactly is a stele?
It's essentially a large, upright stone slab, often used for inscriptions or commemorative purposes. In this case, it served as a public display of the law.
And this stele, it wasn't hidden away in some royal archive, was it?
No, it was placed in a public area where people could see it. Even though literacy was limited, the visual impact of the stele would have been significant. It was a constant reminder of the law and the king's authority.
And that stele, it has its own story to tell, doesn't it?
It does. It was later plundered by the Elamites, taken from Babylon, and carried off to their capital, Susa.
And that's where it remained for centuries.
Until 1901, when French archaeologists excavating Susa unearthed this incredible artifact. It was a momentous discovery, providing us with a tangible link to this ancient legal system.
Wow, that's amazing. And where's the stele now?
It now resides in the Louvre Museum in Paris, where it continues to fascinate visitors from around the world.
Incredible. So these laws, these 282 laws, they were inscribed in Akkadian, the language of Babylon.
Yes, and that's an important point. Hammurabi, through his language reforms, had made Akkadian the common language of his empire.
So these laws weren't just for the elite, for those who could read some obscure language.
Not at all. They were written in the language of the people. Anyone who could read in Babylon could understand the laws.
It makes you wonder how many people actually gathered around that stele trying to decipher those ancient laws.
It's a fascinating image, isn't it? Imagine standing there thousands of years ago trying to make sense of those inscribed words.
It really brings it to life. And at the top of the stele, there's an image, right?
Yes, a very important image. It depicts Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the Babylonian god of justice. It's a powerful image, meant to convey the divine authority behind these laws.
So Hammurabi wasn't just a king making laws. He was a king chosen by the gods to deliver justice to his people.
Precisely. And the preface to the code reinforces this idea. It states explicitly that Hammurabi was divinely selected to bring these laws to his people, to establish justice and righteousness in the land.
That's pretty powerful stuff. And Hammurabi's image as a lawgiver, it's really endured, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He's often depicted holding the Code of Hammurabi, a symbol of justice and order. You can even find his likeness in modern-day law buildings around the world.
I've seen those images. It's amazing to think that a king who lived almost 4,000 years ago is still so closely associated with the concept of law.
It's a testament to the impact of his legal code and his enduring legacy.
So beyond the laws, beyond the conquests, what was Hammurabi like as a ruler? What kind of legacy did he leave behind?
Well, based on the evidence we have, it seems Hammurabi was deeply respected, even revered during his lifetime.
Respected. More like worshipped, right?
You're not far off. People started using his name in their own names, like Hammurabi Ili, which means Hammurabi is my god.
Wow. That's some serious hero worship.
It is, and it reflects the high esteem in which he was held. He was seen as a strong leader, a just ruler, someone who brought peace and order to a chaotic world.
And the early commemorations of his reign, they seem to focus on these aspects, right?
Yes, initially, the emphasis was on his victories in war, the peace he established, his commitment to justice.
But as time went on, something shifted.
It did. Over time, his role as the lawgiver became the dominant aspect of his legacy. It's almost as if his military achievements, his conquests, were overshadowed by his legal contributions.
It's fascinating how perceptions can change over time.
It is, and for later Mesopotamians, Hammurabi's reign became a kind of golden age, a reference point for the distant past, a time when a wise and just king ruled over a united and prosperous land.
And even after his empire crumbled, his legacy lived on.
Oh, absolutely. Long after the Babylonian Empire had fallen, kings in the Near East would claim descent from Hammurabi. It was a way of legitimizing their rule, of connecting themselves to this legendary figure who had become synonymous with just and effective leadership.
And then, in the late 19th century, archaeologists rediscovered Hammurabi. It was like he was brought back to life after centuries of obscurity.
It was. The discovery of his code, along with other inscriptions and artifacts, reignited interest in his reign and his legacy. And he's continued to be a subject of fascination for historians, legal scholars, and anyone interested in the ancient world.
He's a figure who seems to capture our imagination even after all these centuries.
He does. He was a complex and compelling figure, a king who was both a conqueror and a lawgiver, a warrior and an administrator. His story is a reminder that the past is never truly past. It continues to shape our present in ways we might not even realize.
So under Hammurabi, Babylon really became the center of the Mesopotamian world, right?
It did. Under his rule, Babylon rose to prominence, becoming the most holy city in southern Mesopotamia. It effectively replaced Nippur, which had been the religious center for centuries.
So Babylon's rise was directly linked to Hammurabi's success.
To a large extent, yes. His conquests brought wealth and prestige to the city. His building projects, like the expansion of temples and the fortification of its walls, made it a symbol of power and prosperity.
But this golden age, this Babylonian Empire, it didn't last forever, did it?
Unfortunately, no. After Hammurabi's death, things started to unravel. His successor, Samsu-iluna, faced a series of challenges, both internal and external.
Like what?
Well, there were rebellions, economic problems, and perhaps most significantly, the rise of new threats.
New threats? From where?
From various directions. There was Assyria, which was eager to regain its independence and reassert its power. There was the Sealand dynasty, a group of rebels who established their own kingdom in the south. And then there were the Elamites and the Kassites, both eager to take advantage of Babylonian weakness.
So the empire began to crumble.
It did. And the final blow came in 1595 BC when Babylon was sacked by the Hittites, a powerful kingdom from Anatolia.
The Hittites. That must have been a devastating blow.
It was. It marked the end of the Amorite dynasty that Hammurabi had established.
And what happened to Babylon after the Hittites?
Well, the Hittites didn't stay long. They handed control of Babylon over to their Kassite allies. And the Kassites, who would rule Babylon for over 400 years, they actually adopted many aspects of Babylonian culture, including Hammurabi's code of laws.
That's interesting. So even though the empire fell, Hammurabi's legacy lived on through his laws.
Exactly. It shows the enduring impact of his legal code. Even foreign rulers recognized its value and incorporated it into their own legal systems.
So despite the fall of his dynasty, Hammurabi was still remembered, still revered.
Oh, absolutely. And we have some pretty striking examples of this. A couple of centuries after Hammurabi's death, the Elamite king, Shutrukanahunt III, he raided Babylon and carried off a bunch of stone monuments, including the stele with Hammurabi's code.
I remember reading about that. And he basically defaced those monuments, right?
He did. On most of them, he erased the original inscriptions and replaced them with his own. It was a way of asserting his own authority, of claiming these monuments as his own.
But not on Hammurabi's stele.
No. On the stele with Hammurabi's code, he only erased a few columns and didn't add his own inscription. It's almost as if he recognized the significance of this monument, the weight of Hammurabi's legacy, and didn't want to completely obliterate it.
That's amazing. A sign of respect, even from a conquering king.
It is, and it's not the only example. Centuries later, the kings of Suhu, a region along the Euphrates River, they claimed descent from Hammurabi. And even in Neo-Babylonian times, kings would refer to themselves as a second Hammurabi when granting tax exemptions or enacting just laws.
So Hammurabi became this kind of archetype, this ideal of a just and effective ruler.
Exactly. His name became synonymous with good governance, with justice, with the rule of law. It's a legacy that few rulers in history can match.
Absolutely. And speaking of legacies, let's talk about one of the most fascinating and controversial aspects of Hammurabi's legacy, the relationship between his code and biblical law.
Ah, yes. The Babel and Babel controversy, a debate that raged in Germany in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
I've heard about that. What was it all about?
Well, it was sparked by an Assyriologist named Friedrich Delitzsch. He gave a lecture in 1902 where he basically argued that the Mosaic laws, as found in the Old Testament, were directly copied from Hammurabi's code.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
It was, and it caused a huge uproar. People were outraged. They accused Delitzsch of undermining the authority of the Bible. Even the Kaiser himself distanced himself from these views.
So it was more than just an academic debate. It was a cultural and religious controversy.
Absolutely. It touched on some very sensitive issues, and Delitzsch didn't back down. He even wrote a book called Die große Täuschung, which means The Great Deception, where he argued that Babylonian influence on the Hebrew Bible was much more extensive than people realized.
So he was basically saying that the Bible was, to some extent, a product of Babylonian culture.
In a way, yes. And while his views were considered radical at the time, they did raise some interesting questions about cultural exchange and the transmission of ideas in the ancient world.
And did any scholars agree with him?
Well, some did, at least partially. Earlier in the 20th century, there were even some who believed that Hammurabi was the same person as Amraphel, a biblical figure mentioned in Genesis.
Amraphel, the king of Shinar.
The very same. But that view has largely been discredited. There's no evidence outside the Bible to support Amraphel's existence.
So was there any connection between Hammurabi's code and the Bible?
There are definitely some parallels between Hammurabi's code and the Covenant Code, which is the set of laws given to Moses in the book of Exodus.
Like what?
Well, both codes address similar issues like theft, adultery, assault, and they often prescribe similar punishments.
So does that mean that the biblical laws were copied from Hammurabi's code?
It's not that simple. Since Delitzsch's time, archaeologists have discovered even earlier law codes, which suggest that both Hammurabi's code and the biblical laws were likely drawing on a common legal tradition, a kind of shared legal heritage that existed in the ancient Near East.
I see. So not direct copying, but a shared legal background.
Exactly. And while most scholars today reject the idea of direct borrowing, there are still some who argue that Hammurabi's code had a direct influence on the biblical laws. One scholar, David P. Wright, has even argued that the Covenant Code was primarily based on Hammurabi's laws.
So the debate continues.
It does, and it's a debate that likely won't be settled anytime soon. But what's clear is that both Hammurabi's code and the biblical laws are products of their time and their culture. They reflect the values and beliefs of the societies that produce them.
And they continue to fascinate us today.
Absolutely. They offer us a window into the legal and moral world of the ancient Near East. They challenge us to think about the origins of law, the nature of justice, and the evolution of human values over time.
So as we wrap up our exploration of Hammurabi, let's take a moment to consider his remarkable legacy. This king, who started as the ruler of a relatively small kingdom, rose to conquer and unify almost all of Mesopotamia.
He was a brilliant military strategist, a skilled administrator, and perhaps most importantly, a lawgiver whose code has echoed through the centuries.
And that code, the Code of Hammurabi, with its emphasis on punishment, its limitations on retribution, and its early recognition of the presumption of innocence, it represents a significant step in the development of legal thought.
A step that continues to influence legal systems and inspire debate even today.
So, as we leave behind the ancient world of Babylon, let's ponder this. How do the legal principles of Hammurabi's time compare to our own? And what can we learn from this ancient king about the challenges and complexities of governing a vast and diverse society?
It's a question worth pondering. After all, the echoes of the past often resonate in the present, shaping our understanding of law, justice, and the very fabric of human civilization.
And that's something we're thinking about, isn't it?
I'd say so.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this journey back in time. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of history.
been a pleasure.
And always remember, the past is never truly past. It's a conversation that continues to unfold.
Indeed it does.